Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We've got two goods and a crazy for you today. We'll be taking a look at how Americans really do have expectations of fiscal responsibility at the federal government level, which is great. We'll also take a look at a benefit, but potentially a serious benefit of Trump's recently announced trade policies. And we'll take a closer look at the 2028 presidential race, and specifically a name that's getting way too much attention, that's getting more serious. But Jim, we have a quick follow-up from yesterday, because yesterday our good martini was the scoop from the Washington Free Beacon, where President Trump was saying, I have given my full support to Chris Sununu to run for the U.S. Senate seat in New Hampshire. Open seat. Jeanne Shaheen has announced she's going to retire after 3 terms. Looked like, as a result of the Oval Office meeting, that Chris Sununu was really serious about this. But now the New Hampshire Journal reporting, quote, "It's not for me. I talked to the White House this morning. I talked to Tim Scott, thanked him for all their support and confidence, but I don't have to be the candidate, and I'm not going to be the candidate." So I don't know what that's going to do for the Trump-Sununu relationship. Might not matter at this point. So Republicans in New Hampshire, you're going to have to find a candidate with far less name recognition, potentially more conservative, potentially in a tough midterm environment. But Jim, how big of a gut punch is this to the GOP?
If it's not a gut punch, it's frustrating. And it's not merely because longtime listener and friend of the program, Michael Graham, who writes the New Hampshire Journal, wrote an article yesterday saying, quote, "For the Republican Party, there's a lot of turbulence, as they might say in an airplane, a lot of unknowns between now. So you want your strongest team on the field," said Jim Garrity, senior political correspondent on his Three Martini Lunch podcast Monday. Greg, this is Greg Columbus erasure. This is But Sununu looks like the strongest team on the field. The president is being a team player, not getting old grudges get in the way of that. So that is very good, new Republicans. We'll see if it holds. I guess that's the only part of the quote. So right after they run that, Sununu comes out and says, "Yeah, I'm not running." And they tweeted out one of my comments. I think all in all, if he wasn't interested, he'd be saying he's not interested. Now, he did. He just waited until after I had gone on record saying, looks like he's running. This is good news. So kind of frustrating. I got to say this, Governor, you'll always be a friend of the program, but decisions like this, that is not how you get to be the first 2-time guest on the Three Martini Lunch podcast. That we are deeply disappointed. I mean, honestly, if he sees himself as a governor and he doesn't really think he'd be happy as a senator, and okay, fine, I guess I can respect that. But also, it felt like for the last couple of weeks he was thinking pretty seriously about it. So it's a little, can't help but wonder if the economic turns had some influence on the thinking there. I guess we'll see. Yeah,
if he thought there were going to be major headwinds, it's definitely a state that leans Democratic. Both senators right now, both House members, Democrats. And so, yeah, Republicans not necessarily going back to square one, but pretty darn close to square one. And we probably won't get now the Chris versus Chris race up there. Chris Sununu against Chris Pappas. I do have another friend named Chris who lives in New Hampshire who would probably be better than both of them, but I think he'd rather be tortured than run for politics. But anyway, New Hampshire Republicans, the hill got a little bit steeper, but we'll see what happens. But we do have good news that we'll get to in just a moment about how the American people have a much higher expectation of their government than the media would have us believe. But in the meantime, fast-growing trees is the way to get your yard, your garden, your house all set this spring. Did you know Fast Growing Trees is the biggest online nursery in the United States, with thousands of different plants and more than 2 million happy customers?
You don't need to have a yard or a lot of space, and you can grow lemon, avocado, olive, or fig trees inside your house, and that's on top of the wide variety of houseplants that are available. The experts at Fast Growing Trees curate thousands of plants so you can find the perfect fit for your specific climate, location, and needs. And you won't have to drive around to nurseries or big garden centers and make a mess in the back of your car. Fast Growing Trees makes it easy to order online. Your plants are delivered right to your door in just a few days.
Our experience with Fast Growing Trees has been fantastic. And we've had several different plants that we've ordered from them. They've all turned out great. The fig tree, the monstera, we had the lemon plant. We had many spices, basil, I think we had, oregano, parsley, and the Alive and Thrive guarantee is fantastic. And the rare occurrence where things don't arrive as in great a shape as they should, they will make it right immediately, no hassle whatsoever. This spring, get up to 50% off select plants at fastgrowingtrees.com. fastgrowingtrees.com/martini. Plus, use the code martini at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Visit fastgrowingtrees.com/martini and use the code martini. Now's the perfect time to plant. Offer valid for a limited time. Terms apply. fastgrowingtrees.com/martini. All right, Jim, let's talk about our federal government and what the American people expect of it in terms of fiscal responsibility. We've seen a number of polls out lately, and it varies from outfit to outfit, but people generally like the idea of DOGE. They don't necessarily love how it's being done, but overall, they think government's too big. And they think government needs to be reined in. And so this is now being backed up in a poll conducted by the Wall Street Journal, where 69% agree that federal spending should be cut, even if a portion of that 69% don't like necessarily how Elon Musk and his team are going about it. So the actual numbers are 41% say Elon Musk should keep going with his work to cut the federal government and federal spending. 28% think federal spending should be cut, but they don't like the way that he's doing it. Another 28% think Elon Musk should stop his work to cut the federal government and federal spending. 4% don't know. And then another question in this survey, do you think that the federal budget contains enough waste, fraud, and abuse that the budget could be balanced if the waste, fraud, and abuse was cut? 53% say yes, only 35% say no, 12% don't know or refused. So, Jim, I think the American people have been gaslit so many times on all the things that supposedly have to be paid for, Orwellian sounding terms like the Inflation Reduction Act. We're going to cut inflation by spending more money that we don't already have. People are just sick of knowing that they have to balance their home budget, be able to pay all their bills, pay the mortgage, pay off the cars based on the income that they have. Most local governments and state governments have to do this. The federal government, however, can rack up now $36 to $37 trillion in debt and then expect to be reelected. The American people are kind of fed up with this. They should be, and they're demanding better, and it's good to see these numbers.
Yeah, now some people might say there's a little bit of a bitter aftertaste to this good martini because they can point to a lot of polling going back decades where lots of Americans say there's a lot of waste, fraud, mismanagement, and abuse in the federal budget. We need to get rid of it. And then when it comes to make an actual specific cut, they go, oh, no, not that one. No. We like that part of government spending. And it was kind of interesting. So this was originally shared by Tom Bevan over at Real Clear Politics. And one of the first responses comes from Gerard Baker. Gerard Baker, who is the editor-at-large and free expression columnist at the Wall Street Journal, saying, now ask them how much they think we spend on overseas aid. And yes, polling has indicated that most Americans wildly overestimate how much of the budget is on foreign aid. It's usually in the neighborhood of maybe 1% in a good year. So Gerard Baker saying, yeah, I know my institution did that poll, but let's not read too much into that number, or at least pointing out that some of this may be a misperception. I would point out when you ask people, is there enough waste, fraud, abuse, mismanagement in the federal government to balance the budget? Let me remind you that the deficit for last year was $1.8 trillion, which is a lot. I don't know if you necessarily could reach that. You could do a lot. You could probably, took out all the waste management, abuse, stuff like that. You could probably put a decent dent in it. And I think you should do it because I think waste, fraud, mismanagement, abuse are all bad things. And you kind of alluded to my other kind of thought on this, Greg, is that you think about how much the Biden presidency, the quote unquote bipartisan infrastructure act, the Build Back Better Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. Boy, that inflation went down. All these things were basically based upon a Democratic Party's effort to say, hey, America, government is good. You love government. Government does a great job. In fact, it's going to take, we want to raise taxes. We want to take more money for it, but we're going to do more with it, and you're going to love what we do with it. And then they built was it 8 electric chargers? And, Biden in the campaign was frustrated that he couldn't tour more construction sites to demonstrate your tax dollars are building this new highway interchange or this new port or this new, and because they were all tied up in red tape, they weren't actually gotten started on them. And then think about it, that was all passed in the first 2 years of the Biden presidency. And there they were in 2024, and they weren't able to show, other than maybe a couple shovels and all those shovel-ready jobs, as Obama had said a couple of years ago. We went through this in the beginning of the Obama years. Green shoots, remember? All this, spring, and all of a sudden Obama later lamenting all those shovel-ready jobs turned out to not be so shovel-ready. Ezra Klein has a new book in which he was apparently making Jon Stewart's head explode when he described all of the red tape and all the steps you had to go through in order to qualify for federal funding for these projects. So the Democratic Party, there's a reason Americans feel this way about the federal government and federal spending. They had experience. They've lived through several cycles of this, of Democrats saying, yeah, we're going to take more of your money, but we're going to do amazing things with it. And then they get there, and you get something like the equivalent of the Big Dig up in Boston, which took decades to finish, or any one of these other projects. New York City's got subway lines that have been taking, better part of a decade to finish. They're very slow moving. People don't feel like they're getting their money's worth for this stuff. So they look at that and say, you know what? There must be a lot of waste in there. There must be a lot of money that's being spent on stuff that doesn't need to be spent on there. And in a lot of cases, they're right. And in the case of Dogue, we didn't really need to finance that play about racism in Dublin. The Irish could pay for it themselves. Yeah. Other stuff, I think, tracking Ebola and making sure it doesn't come through airports, that strikes me as a little more important. I'm not saying Doge's been perfect, but I think by and large, the American people look at the federal government they see as bloated and wasteful. It's full of spending on stuff that doesn't really need to happen. And I think I'm not surprised that 41% say, rah, rah, go Elon Musk. And another 28% look, I got some problems with how Musk is going about this, but I like the concept federal spending should be cut. So keep going, Elon. Just maybe be a little more careful, a little more openness. Make sure you got documentation for everything, and then you can really rip into them. More interviews like the ones with Brett Baer, by the way, would be a very good idea.
Two quick thoughts on this. Jim, I think it was a 2012 re-election campaign for Barack Obama where his big line was, government is the things we agreed to do together. I think we need to spend more time apart. Maybe see other
conscious
people.
Uncoupling, as Gwyneth Paltrow used to put it.
Yes, exactly. And this is not meant to make us feel old, although it will. It was 30 years ago that the Republican Revolution took hold. They were elected in 94, took office in 95. And one of the things they tried to do in that first Congress with Gingrich as Speaker and Dole as Senate Majority Leader was pass a constitutional amendment to mandate a balanced budget, which passed the 2/3 majority in the House and came one vote short in the U.S. Senate. Think of where we would be differently in terms of our debt, in terms of our debt paying interest, and so many other things if we had gotten one more vote. Because I assume the states which have to do that, most of them anyway, would probably not have had a hard time ratifying that amendment.
All these little decisions, John McCain and Obamacare with the thumbs up, thumbs down, all these tiny little one vote decisions. If there hadn't been a pass interference call on Sauce Gardner in that game against the Kansas City Chiefs. Wait, we won't do this for our special edition this week, but at some point we could do one entirely on moments of history, which everything changed. And the little tiny decisions and how close we came to something different. Alternate histories of how we ended up with utopia if the refs had just, not thrown that flag.
Yes, because the Robert Saleh era would have been completely different.
Completely different. Completely
been able to hang on to that game.
There were no giant structural problems with that team. It was just one lousy call late in one game.
Well, like we said, pretty much everybody else needs to spend within their means, so the federal government should be no different. But one of the areas where you definitely need to spend within your means is when you're running your business. So what does your business look like right now? What does the future hold for it? Some of that's out of your control. Markets, interest rates, inflation, all sorts of things like that. But other things you can control. And for more than 38,000 businesses, they've future-proofed their operations with NetSuite by Oracle, the leading cloud ERP platform, which integrates key business functions like accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one seamless system.
With a unified business management suite, NetSuite provides one source of truth. This gives you complete visibility and control, enabling quick, informed decisions based on real-time data. You can gain real-time insights and forecasting to make proactive, data-driven decisions. With actionable data at your fingertips, you can anticipate trends and respond faster to opportunities.
Yeah, the business experts and the business owners that I talk to are very clear about this. Don't make your life more complicated than it needs to be. There's a lot of things that complicate your life as a business owner. And so let this AI, let NetSuite by Oracle, take care of the things that it can take care of and free you up to do what you do best. And also, they are offering you the opportunity to download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/martini. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/martini. That's netsuite.com/martini. All right, Jim, we have explained a couple of different times now since last Wednesday about why adding a lot of tariffs is not necessarily good for the economy. But as you write in the Morning Jolt today, there already seems to be at least one significant benefit, at least at the moment, and that is the dropping price of oil, which is good for American consumers, of course. We've talked about that a number of times. It's one of Trump's goals to bring costs down across the board, because if transportation costs are down, then the price of just about everything you buy that requires transportation should be down. But it's also really, really bad for Russia. So explain how this works, at least temporarily, very much against Vladimir Putin.
Sure. Look, this is, people say I don't give the Trump administration credit. Hey, I'm going to give them credit for a potentially absolute game changer in the Russian invasion of Ukraine that I suspect they did not intend at all. This may be the first inadvertent body blow to a foreign enemy's economy that's ever been enacted, and this should get Trump the Nobel Peace Prize if things shake out the way they're looking. So, last weekend on Meet the Press, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was pointing out, people are pointing out the markets are down, but let's point out that, oil prices went down almost 15% in 2 days. Yeah, that's what happens when everybody thinks the demand is going to decline because everybody thinks a recession is coming. Make no mistake, this is going to, if we continue with these tariffs and if we get into a global trade war, you're going to see a whole lot of economic pain all around the world. In fact, the cover of today's Wall Street Journal, market turmoil spreads across the globe. It's not just what you're seeing at the Dow Jones, you're seeing it all around there, which means economic contraction, not just in the United States, but in all these countries that are used to making a lot of money from exporting goods to the U.S. That also is reducing demand, which means people are driving less, which means people are flying less jet fuel, etc. Demand for oil is going down. Which country really, really depends upon oil exports and also natural gas exports? Russia. In fact, 1/3 of the entire Russian government budget is spent on military stuff. That's what happens when you decide to invade another country that is resisting you with everything it's got. Well, the Russian government, when they put together their budgets, they had to figure out, okay, we're going to get a certain amount of money from oil. How much should we expect? And they basically calculated, they expected the average oil price for the entirety of 2025 was going to be around $70 per barrel. Some people said that was a little bit optimistic, but I'm not going to pretend to know enough about to say what it was. However, last week it was selling at $52 a barrel. You could do the math on this, but basically every time it goes down $10, that's going to cost them another 2 trillion rubles, or about $23 billion. That money is money they need to keep the economy going, because they need the economy going in order to fund all the stuff they have to buy to continue the war going. And if they don't have enough money coming in, all of a sudden it becomes a lot harder to, they can't buy the artillery, they can't buy the tanks, the vehicles, all the stuff that they need to do there. So, I go through this in greater detail in the Morning Jolt. I tried to link to as many direct sources as possible. I realize this international economic stuff is pretty complicated, but the gist is Russia needs to sell oil and natural gas to keep their economy going. Because of a trade war, demand is going to plummet. And if plummeting demand means the prices get lower, they're already significantly lower than they were calculating. Russia's going to run a big deficit. You might say, okay, well, they can borrow the money. Well, Russia already defaulted on some of its foreign debt back in 2022. People are always willing to buy U.S. government debt because, for all our other flaws, we've always paid back our debts. Well, actually, there were like 4 little times we forgot to put the right stamp on it. And that didn't send to the check. But basically the U.S. government almost always, 99.9999% of the time, pays back its debts. Russia, it's a little shakier. Ask anybody who had money there in, say, 1918 or something like that. So people are much less likely to loan money to Russia. They want much higher interest rates in repayment. And Russia could theoretically say to the international banks that are still operating in Russia, yes, by the way, there are still international banks still operating in Russia. Well, we're going to make you guys loan us money. And you can do that, but that's only going to last for a little while, because eventually those international banks will say, fine, we're going to leave Russia. And you end up in a situation where Russia just doesn't have enough money going on. So if we end up with a giant global recession, that's going to be really bad. It's going to be really bad for everybody all around the world, but it's going to be really, really, really bad for Russia, and conceivably might mean they can't finance their military anymore. So I'm thrilled about this. I'm really upset about everything else that's going to happen with the trade tariffs. But conceivably, Donald Trump may be the guy who ended up bringing the Russian government and the Russian economy and the Russian military to its knees entirely by accident.
The 3 Martini Lunch, our podcast, is sponsored by BetterHelp today. And therapy can feel like a big investment. Look, going to any doctor or expert or counselor is not going to be cheap these days, but the state of your mind is just as important as your physical health. And BetterHelp can actually make it easier on your pocketbook as well, because traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to as much as $250 per session, which obviously adds up fast. But with BetterHelp Online Therapy, you can save on average up to 50% per session.
With BetterHelp, you pay a flat fee for weekly sessions, which saves you big on cost and time. And therapy should feel accessible, not like a luxury. With online therapy, you get quality care at a price that makes sense and can help you with anything from anxiety to just everyday stress. Your mental health is worth it, and now it's within reach.
With more than 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served more than 5 million people globally. It's also very convenient. You can join a session with the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life. Plus, you can switch therapists at any time. Your well-being is worth it. Visit BetterHelp.com/3ML to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/3ML. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And the age of the celebrity politician has been upon us for a long time. Ronald Reagan went about it the right way. He was famous, of course, for being an actor, but he did his homework, understood policies, became a two-term governor of the largest state in the country. I don't know if it was the most populous at the time, but it might have been. And then obviously a two-term president. And in between being governor and being president, he studied policy like crazy. More recently, we've had Arnold Schwarzenegger as governor of California. We've had Al Franken, who's obviously not as big of a star as Arnold Schwarzenegger. But I'm sure there are many others that I'm not thinking of at the moment. But then there's other people who kind of became celebrities as politicians, like Barack Obama, like Elizabeth Warren to some extent, like AOC, like we talked about not that long ago. So it doesn't surprise us that now celebrities are being considered even a few years off for the 2028 presidential election. But one person who seems to be getting way too much chatter right now, I don't know if it's because he's doing commentary on News Nation or he just never seems to stop talking, is ESPN host Stephen A. Smith. If you don't know who he is, he's on in the mornings on ESPN. They pay him a ton of money, tens of millions of dollars a year. But this guy can get outraged about every single sports story that's ever happened on cue. And so that is a skill, whether it's, who took the last shot in the game last night. That could be a cataclysmic event or a coaching change or whatever it is. But anyway, his volume and his heart rate are always stratospheric. So anyway, he now appears to be edging closer to politics. Politico reporting that Smith, who has long mixed some political commentary into his analysis of basketball and other subjects, said Monday that he's considering a run for office because of the turmoil of recent days under President Trump. Quote, "Time to stop messing around," Smith said on X. "Life is great, especially at ESPN Disney. Hate the thought of being a politician, but sick of this mess. So I'm officially leaving all doors open." And Smith did get a little bit of attention during the 2024 campaign because he is a Democrat, but he could also point out some of the flaws of the Democratic Party, especially on cultural issues and so forth. Jim, I assume he's doing this to keep his name even more in the public eye, which I didn't know was possible, but I doubt he'll end up running ultimately because the party probably prefers kind of the people they've homegrown. But what do you make of the buzz that didn't just start today, but is now gathering more steam about Stephen A. Smith?
Gregory Peyton Columbus. You cannot tell me that you don't see that saying that he's officially not ruling it out is just another effort to get this guy's name in the media one more time. I'm just assuming your middle name is Peyton because you're a Bears fan. And or I didn't want to help any of the identity thieves out there by just blurting out your middle name on air. So it's Stephen. By the way, I'm not really doing a Stephen A. Smith impression. I'm doing a Jay Farrow doing a Stephen A. Smith impression. Back when that was all very fresh and fun, and it was very enjoyable. Like the borderline manic depressive nature of Stephen A. Smith was just very, a lot of fun on the show. No, this is not a good idea. I don't look. I'm not even sure he's among the top 5 people at ESPN that I would put in there's like a whole bunch of ex-Jets who like Rex Ryan, he could build a defense. I'll give you that. And if before you say, come on, you shouldn't be having ex-football coaches involved in major policy decisions, I'll refer you to Senator Tuberville. On the one hand, I think this is just hype. I think this is just, Stephen A. Smith did stand out as someone who was, usually a Democrat, but could see that Joe Biden was older than Aaron Rodgers and older than a whole bunch of, older than Methuselah. And as a result of it, it's like, hey, this is not a good idea. And that when Kamala Harris was not doing great, he was not buying into the joy. And for that, ironically, I think that got him a certain amount of attention on the right, when I think it was simply a Democrat with eyes is all he really needed to be to recognize those flaws in those candidates. The presidency is not an entry-level job. The presidency, if you're like, the first sign that you understand the responsibilities of the presidency and the high odds that at some point during your term, you will be writing letters of condolence to the families of servicemen who have died because of your orders. And that's not a matter of presidents being warmongers. It's just a matter of like, this is a dangerous world and U.S. men and women serve in harm's way all the time. The first sign that you shouldn't be president is that you want the job. You should recognize it as this terrifying responsibility that, life and death decisions every single day. The other thing I kind of recognized about this is that I don't want to poo-poo everybody over at ESPN. I think people have recognized that the coverage has gone a lot more towards sit around a desk and yell at each other shows. And as much as ESPN can really infuriate me as a sports fan, at least they no longer inflict Colin Cowherd on us, who is the man who gets me to yell at my radio more than anybody else in the history of the medium. But I just kind of you think back. Just the other day, I was watching the music video channel, and Hootie and the Blowfish Only Want to Be With You, which begins with a Sports Center style anchoring with Dan Patrick and Keith Olbermann, and then they have Chris Berman, and at one point Charlie Steiner, and who's the guy who switched over to the Olympics?
Mike Tirico?
Mike Tirico, thank you. And by the way, you look back, there was just, just a murderer's row of talented, funny, charming sportscasters on SportsCenter back then. And it was really important then because you didn't have the internet as much. And so if you wanted to know how your team, and you didn't live in the locality, you had to tune into SportsCenter to see how it did. And unlike traditional sportscasting was like, the Rams won 37-20. Instead, they would introduce the thing, they'd show you the highlights, and then they'd show you how it ended. So you almost had to tune in to see how that particular game ended. They could make anything, a Tampa Bay Lightning mid-season game. They would tell a little story with each thing that was happening in the sports world. So I just look back and I'm like, God, ESPN was really good. It really made it fun to be a sports fan. I don't know if guys sitting around yelling at each other around a desk around a table is all that fun compared to the old days. And Stephen A. Smith is the champion of sitting at a table and yelling about something that happened. And, the world might need that. It does not need that in the Oval Office.
Now, the one name we did not mention in the lead-in, of course, is Donald Trump, but he became a celebrity after becoming a business guy. He's been a celebrity a long time, so he probably would qualify when he was host of The Apprentice for a lot of years before he became president of the United States. And I think some of those celebrities have a way of perhaps tapping in a way that politicians don't, because they don't approach it the same way politicians do. So maybe that's why Reagan was successful. That's why Trump shocked the Republican establishment in 2016 and so forth. But that doesn't mean that every celebrity that is interested in politics should be running for things.
We can't elect Smith. He could start a trade war and tank the markets.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Columbus, Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Columbus. Have a great Tuesday. Join us. Actually, you heard him mention that we're going to be taping a special. If all goes well, it'll actually run next week. So you will hear him once before Easter, but he is going to be on spring break and doing a couple other things. And so, Jim, we wish you well, safe travels, and we'll hear you once before Easter, but officially we'll see you back for our regular fare the day after Easter, April 21st.
Listeners, Greg, I will see you sometime later this month.
So join us again tomorrow for the next 3 Martini Lunch.